Greetings, everybody. Learning as a hobby here. In this video, I want to go through my chapter summary for Chapter 1 in An Introduction to Formal Logic by Peter Smith, second edition. So that's what I'll do. Let me bring up my notes here. Okay, so we'll go over my chapter summary. We start with talking about what logic is the study of. So the core business of logic is the systematic evaluation of arguments for internal cogency, and we'll explain what that means more in depth later on. The kind of internal cogency that will especially concern us in this book will be logical validity. Next, we talk about what is an argument. So by argument, we mean a chain of reasoning, short or long, in support of some conclusion, as opposed to, stop hitting me, that type of argument. Um, Kinds of evaluation. Um, so here we're going to we can evaluate this argument that we have here in two different ways, which we'll see in a second. Argument A, Smith labels all the arguments, the example arguments in this section, like A, B, C, and so on. So this is argument A. So later on, when we refer back to argument A, this is the one that we're talking about. All right, we have two premises and a conclusion here. Premise one is all philosophers are eccentric. Premise two is Jack is a philosopher, and then the conclusion is Jack is eccentric. This bit of reasoning can now be evaluated along two quite independent dimensions, right? The first dimension is, are the premises A1 and A2 correct? In other words, are the inputs to your inference step correct? So in other words, A1 is debatable whether or not, all philosophers are eccentric, and A2 might be mistaken. Maybe Jack isn't a philosopher. Maybe we misunderstood or something. So, um, and then dimension two, if the premises A1 and A2 are correct, does our conclusion A3 follow inescapably from the premises? In this particular example, the answer is yes, but that won't always be true. Okay, we typically want both to start from true premises and to reason by steps, which can be relied on to take us to further truths. These are two distinct aims. All right, the logician wants to know when an when an argument's premises, supposing we accept them, do indeed provide compelling grounds for also accepting its conclusion. It is in this sense that logic is concerned with the, quote, internal cogency of our reasoning. Right. The next section, deduction and versus induction. So here we have argument B and then also argument C. Let's look at argument B. So we have again two premises and a conclusion. Here's premise one and premise two. Premise one, either Jill is in the library or she's in the bookshop. Premise two, Jill isn't in the library. So conclusion, Jill is in the bookshop. Again, if B1 and B2 are both true, who knows if they actually are, then B3 cannot conceivably fail to be true. All right. Consider the following contrasting case to illustrate that not all good reasoning is of this type. So here we have argument C. All right. Premise one, cups of coffee from great beans that looked and tasted just fine haven't killed anyone in the past. Premise two, this present cup of great beans coffee looks good and tastes just fine. C1 and C2 or something like them support your belief that, here's the conclusion, this present cup of great beans coffee won't kill you. While C1 and C2 do give excellent grounds for believing C3, it's not the case that the truth of C1 and C2 absolutely guarantees C3 to be true. This is a fundamental difference between arguments A and B and argument C. All right. If an inference step from premises to a conclusion is completely watertight, for example, if the truth of the premises absolutely guarantees the truth of the conclusion, then we say that this inference step is deductively valid. Equivalently, when an inference step is deductively valid, we will say that its premises deductively entail its conclusion. Right, the inferential moves in A and B count as being deductively valid. The inference in C, which extrapolates from some sample cases, to further cases is standardly called inductive. The inference in C may be inductively strong. For example, the conclusion is highly probable, assuming the premises are true, but the inference is not deductively valid. All right, the deductive inductive distinction is not the distinction between good and bad reasoning. You can have good deductive arguments, you can have good inductive arguments, you can have bad deductive arguments, and you can have bad inductive arguments. What makes for reliable or reliable enough inductive inference is a very important and decidedly difficult topic, but it's not the topic explored in this book. But I do have some other resources once we're done with deductive logic to look at inferential logic. Okay, this book studies deductive logic. We will study a sharper definition of deductive validity in Chapter 2 and in Chapter 6 and onward, the narrower definition of logical validity. Just a few more examples. Argument D. Right, we have, again, two premises and a conclusion. Premise 1, all Republican voters support capital punishment. Premise 2, Joe supports capital punishment. So 3, Joe is a Republican voter. Right, the inference step here is obviously invalid. Argument E, again, premise 1, most Irish people are Catholics. Premise 2, most Catholics oppose abortion on demand. So conclusion, which is the third proposition here, at least some Irish people oppose abortion on demand. This inference step here is also not deductively valid, right? Then one more example, argument F. 1, some philosophy students admire all logicians. Premise 2, no philosophy student admires anyone irrational. So conclusion 3, no logician is irrational. And then Smith asks us, is the inference step deductively valid this time? And he says that we'll return to this example in Chapter 3. Right. It would be good to have techniques that work mechanically to settle questions of validity as routinely as we can settle simple arithmetic questions by calculation. We will have to wait to see how far this is possible, but for now, we'll just say a little more about what makes any kind of more systematic approach possible, whether mechanical or not. All right, so here, generalizing, recall argument A. This was all philosophers are eccentric. Jack is a philosopher, so 3, Jack is eccentric. Now compare the deductively valid argument A with the following arguments. Right, argument A, all logicians are cool. Premise 2, Russell is a logician. So conclusion, Russell is cool. Right, that's argument A prime. And then we have argument A double prime. Right, premise 1, all robins have red breasts. Premise 2, Tweety is a robin. So conclusion, Tweety has a red breast. And then finally, argument A triple prime. Premise 1, all postmodernists write nonsense. Premise 2, Derrida is a postmodernist. So conclusion, Derrida writes nonsense. It is no accident that these arguments share the property of being internally cogent. These examples make it clear that deductive validity of A prime, A double prime, A triple prime doesn't have anything to do with their specific meaning. It's the common structure that's important. Right? Any inference step that has the form all F are G, N is F, so N is G, is deductively valid. We call this a schema or a structure. Right? Any sensible way of substituting suitable expressions for N is F and is G, and then tidying the result into reasonable English will yield another argument with a deductively valid inference step. So what's important for the logician is the structure. Some forms or patterns of inference are deductively reliable while others aren't. So consider most G are H, most H are K, so at least some G are K. This is the type of inference involved in argument E, and we now know that it isn't trustworthy. Noting that the same form of inference step can feature in many different particular arguments, we can aim to examine generally reliable forms of inference and how they relate. and this will give us a systematic treatment. All right, and then I have the exercise set here, which I'll do in a different video. Okay, so let me stop here. All right, I'm going to do look out for ch chapter two. The chapters in this book are kind of short, so I think I should be able to get through them in a relatively quick amount of time. I have a couple of other lo references that I'm using for logic, and I'll explain those maybe in the uh, my March vlog. I will be going through at least the chapter summaries. I believe in them because I think having several different references is good for this because uh, they go about things in slightly different ways and they add intuition for certain different things. So I'll show, but I'm not going to talk about those in this video. I'll talk about them later on. So anyway, that's chapter one of Peter Smith's Introduction to Formal Logic. I'll see you guys in the next video. Let me know what you think down below, and I'll see you in the next one.